The sea air, sharp with salt and the promise of a storm brewing offshore, did little to soothe the knot of anticipation tightening in my chest. He was arriving today. Daniel. My grandson. The term felt foreign on my tongue, a carefully constructed lie I was about to breathe life into once more. I adjusted the silk scarf around my neck, the cool fabric a welcome contrast to the sudden flush creeping up my skin. The quaint seaside town of Port Blossom was exactly as I remembered, charmingly dilapidated, with pastel-colored houses clinging to the cliffside like stubborn barnacles, and the constant, melancholic cry of gulls overhead. Perfect. Isolated enough, yet possessing a veneer of respectability. Ideal for what I had in mind, the taxi pulled up to the charmingly named Seashell Cottage, a gingerbread house affair with peeling paint and a garden overgrown with sea lavender. I paid the driver, my movements deliberately graceful, practiced over decades of cultivating a certain image. As he wrestled Daniel's luggage from the trunk, I smoothed down the linen skirt of my summer dress and plastered a warm, grandmotherly smile on my face. There he was. Daniel. Taller than I remembered from the last carefully orchestrated family gathering, though gathering implied a genuine kinship, a warmth that was utterly absent. His hair, the color of sun-bleached sand, fell across his forehead as he leaned forward to pay the driver. He had the same earnest, slightly vulnerable eyes as him. A pang, sharp and unwelcome, flickered through me. I tamped it down ruthlessly. Sentimentality was a weakness I could not afford, Eleanor. Daniel's voice was bright, filled with that youthful enthusiasm that grated slightly on my nerves, yet served its purpose. He straightened, a genuine smile lighting up his face, and moved towards me, arms outstretched for a hug. I embraced him warmly, inhaling the clean, faintly masculine scent of his cologne. Something expensive, undoubtedly. He felt solid, strong in my arms. Vital. Everything I was not. Daniel, darling. You're here. You look wonderful, simply wonderful. Travel-weary, I imagine. I drew back, my smile widening, my voice pitched just right, affectionate, slightly concerned, every inch the doting grandmother, a bit, yeah, but excited to be here, he said, his smile infectious. Port Blossom is even prettier than the pictures. And Seashell Cottage, it's perfect, Grandma Eleanor. He gestured around at the slightly faded charm of the cottage, his eyes full of genuine appreciation, Grandma Eleanor. The lie rolled off his tongue, so easily. Years of careful cultivation, of subtle suggestion, had paid off. He believed it. Completely. And that, of course, was the point. Come in, darling. I've made us some lemonade. And I've got all sorts of treats planned for your stay. We'll have such fun, just the two of us, like old times. I linked my arm through his, guiding him towards the cottage door, my voice light, teasing, the perfect picture of a loving grandparent welcoming her grandson. As we stepped inside, into the slightly musty, but undeniably charming, interior of Seashell Cottage, I glanced back at Daniel. His eyes were alight with anticipation, his face open and trusting. He had no idea, of course, what lay beneath the surface of my grandmotherly facade. He saw only warmth, welcome, and the promise of a relaxing vacation, and that was precisely how I intended to keep it. For now, the lemonade was served in frosted glasses, the clinking of ice a cheerful sound in the quiet cottage. We sat in the sun-drenched living room, sunlight streaming through the lace-curtained windows, casting dancing patterns on the floral wallpaper. Daniel recounted his journey, his work, his life in the city, his words tumbling out with youthful energy. I listened attentively, interjecting with appropriate grandmotherly comments. My dear boy, you work too hard. Do make sure you're eating properly. Cities are so draining, aren't they? All the while subtly observing him, assessing him, cataloging his every gesture, every nuance. He was pliable, easily pleased, yearning for connection, for approval, for something. It was all there, just beneath the surface of his cheerful exterior. Vulnerabilities, waiting to be exploited. Opportunities ripe for the taking. So, what have you got planned for us, Grandma Eleanor? Daniel asked, leaning back against the floral cushions, his eyes sparkling with genuine curiosity. Anything exciting? I chuckled, a low, melodious sound I had perfected over years. Exciting? Darling boy, we're here to relax, to unwind, to enjoy the peace and quiet of Port Blossom. But I paused, a playful glint entering my eyes. There are certain local charms I thought you might appreciate. Quaint little shops, lovely coastal walks, perhaps even a boat trip if the weather holds. And of course, I added, lowering my voice conspiratorially, the lobster pot. They do the most divine seafood platter. We simply must go there. Daniel laughed, throwing his head back, the sound echoing pleasantly in the quiet room. Lobster pot it is then. Sounds perfect, Grandma Eleanor. Absolutely perfect. Perfect indeed. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The charm offensive was in full swing. And Daniel, dear, sweet, unsuspecting Daniel, was falling right into my carefully woven W.E.B. as the afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I raised my glass of lemonade, my smile widening, the image of a doting grandmother firmly in place. To Port Blossom, darling, I said, my voice smooth as honey. And to a simply wonderful holiday. He clinked his glass against mine, his eyes shining with innocent anticipation. He had no idea, of course, that this holiday was going to be anything but wonderful. For him, perhaps. But for me, it was going to be so much more. It was going to be interesting, and that, for Eleanor, was always the most delicious game of all. The days in Port Blossom drifted by with a languid rhythm, like waves lapping at the shore. I meticulously cultivated the idyllic grandmother-grandson vacation, filled with coastal walks, quaint tea room visits, and evenings spent playing board games by the fireplace. Daniel reveled in it all, his youthful enthusiasm infectious, if at times a tad tiring. We strolled along the windswept cliffs, breathing in the salty air, and he would recount his ambitions, his dreams, the recent heartbreak with a girl, typical youthful concerns that I listened to with feigned attentiveness. In truth, my mind was occupied elsewhere, studying Daniel, his weaknesses, his latent desires. I noticed his gaze lingering on me a fraction longer than necessary for simple familial attention. When I leaned in to pour his tea, I felt the weight of his eyes on my back. The accidental touches became a little prolonged, a little warmer. Trifles, perhaps, inconsequential to anyone else, but to me, they were like sparks igniting a slow-burning fire. One evening, after a lavish seafood dinner at the Lobster Pot, where he had laughed so readily at my grandmotherly jokes, we returned to the cottage under a blanket of dusk. The sea breeze was particularly brisk that night, and Daniel rubbed his hands together, ostensibly against the chill, though I sensed a different kind of shiver emanating from him. It's so beautiful here, Grandma Eleanor, he said, pausing at the cottage threshold, gazing out at the dark sea blurring into the horizon. Thank you for bringing me. Nonsense, darling, I replied, placing my hand on his arm, letting it linger there a moment longer than strictly needed. The skin beneath my fingers was warm, taut with a subtle tension. It's my pleasure entirely to spend time with you. We stepped inside the cottage, and I lit the fire, casting a cozy, intimate glow across the room. He settled onto the sofa, leaning back in a relaxed posture, his gaze wandering around the room, pausing on the faded photographs in their frames, the bookshelves lined with dusty tomes. You have so much history here, he murmured, sounding genuinely captivated. I never really knew much about your family. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The opening to begin unraveling the threads of truth, to weave my carefully constructed narrative into his receptive mind. I sat beside him on the sofa, maintaining a small but perceptible distance between us. Family, I echoed slowly, as if savoring the word. All families have their secrets, Daniel. Wouldn't you agree? He turned his head towards me, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. What do you mean, Grandma? He asked, curiosity piquing his voice, though I already sensed a faint undercurrent of unease creeping in. The past, I replied enigmatically, my gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Secrets passed down through generations. Bonds that are stronger than blood. I felt him stiffen slightly beside me, his curiosity now laced with a subtle apprehension, perfectly calibrated to my design. Just as it should be. Slowly, step by step, drawing back the veil of mystery, luring him deeper into my carefully crafted trap. "Will you tell me?" he asked, almost a whisper now. Leaning slightly closer, I turned my head towards him, and in the dim light, illuminated only by the flickering firelight, my face, I knew, would appear both mysterious and subtly ominous. I smiled slowly, enticingly, like a serpent poised to strike. "Perhaps," I said softly, my eyes locking with his. "If you're a good boy, Daniel, perhaps I will tell you all of my secrets." A silence fell between us then, charged and heavy with unspoken implications. The game, I knew, was truly beginning. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension, the only sound the crackling fire and the distant murmur of the sea. Daniel's eyes, wide and questioning, were fixed on mine, reflecting the firelight like pools of molten amber. He was hooked. I could feel it, the subtle shift in his posture, the quickening of his breath. My carefully baited hook had found its mark. Secrets are like shadows. "Daniel," I continued, my voice a low, hypnotic murmur, leaning in slightly closer, closing the physical space between us. "They cling to us, they lengthen and distort in the firelight, but they are always there, lurking just beneath the surface." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "What kind of secrets, Grandma Eleanor?" he breathed, his voice barely audible above the fire's whisper. I smiled, a slow, knowing curve of my lips. "Family secrets, darling. The most potent kind. The kind that shape us, define us, bind us together in ways you can't even begin to imagine." I paused, letting my words hang heavy in the air, allowing his curiosity to simmer, to intensify. "Our family, Daniel," I said, drawing out the words, imbuing them with a false weight of significance. "We are different. We are special. We have always been." I let the implication hang, unspoken, but heavy with promise and veiled threat. He shifted on the sofa, a restless movement that betrayed his growing unease, mingled with an undeniable fascination. "Special how?" he pressed, his voice a little stronger now, a touch of youthful bravado creeping back, and I chuckled softly, a low, melodious sound designed to disarm and intrigue. "Patience, darling boy. All will be revealed in time. But some truths are best savored slowly, like a fine wine, don't you think?" I reached out, my hand hovering for a moment before gently resting on his knee. His thigh was firm beneath my fingers, warmth radiating through the fabric of his trousers. I let my hand linger there, just a touch, a fleeting connection, yet laden with unspoken meaning. He didn't pull away. In fact, I felt a subtle tremor run through his leg, a flicker of something. Anticipation? Nervousness? Or something altogether more primal? "But give me a hint," he pleaded, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just a little one. Please, Grandma Eleanor." The grandma now sounded almost perfunctory, a formality he clung to, even as the undercurrents of our conversation shifted into something far more ambiguous. I smiled again, a slow, deliberate unfolding of my lips. "Very well, darling boy. A hint you shall have. Think of echoes, Daniel. Echoes through time. Some bonds are so strong, so profound, that they resonate across lifetimes. They transcend the boundaries of flesh and blood. I reverberate." He frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration, trying to decipher my cryptic words. "Echoes, lifetimes, what are you saying?" I removed my hand from his knee, the sudden absence of contact hanging heavy in the space between us. I stood up gracefully, my movements fluid and deliberate, and walked over to the window, gazing out at the moonlit sea. My back was to him, allowing my words to drift back to him, laced with mystery and intrigue. "Imagine, Daniel, a love so powerful, so consuming, that it cannot be contained by a single lifetime. A love that seeks to reclaim itself, again and again, across the vast expanse of time." I paused, letting my words hang in the air, pregnant with unspoken implications. I turned back to face him, my silhouette framed against the moonlight streaming through the window. My eyes, I knew, would be dark, enigmatic, in the dim light. "Do you believe in such things, Daniel? In eternal connections?" He was sitting forward now, perched on the edge of the sofa, his body language taut with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. He looked younger in that moment, more vulnerable, the earnestness in his eyes now tinged with a nascent, unsettling desire. I don't know," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I've never really thought about it." "Perhaps it's time you started, darling boy," I said softly, moving towards him again, my footsteps almost soundless on the thick carpet. I stopped in front of him, looking down at him, my shadow falling across his face, enveloping him in a cool darkness. "Perhaps it's time you learned about the deeper currents that run through our family. The currents that connect us, in ways you can't yet comprehend." I reached out again, this time lifting my hand to cup his cheek, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the warmth of his skin radiating against my cool touch. His breath hitched, and his eyes, wide and dilated, locked with mine. "We are bound, Daniel," I murmured, my voice a silken whisper, leaning in closer still, my breath warm against his ear. "You and I, bound by something ancient, something powerful." I felt him tremble beneath my touch, a subtle tremor that resonated through my own body. He was so close now, I could see the faint pulse beating in his throat, the minute details of his skin, the flecks of gold in his irises. He was beautiful, in that raw, youthful way, and utterly, utterly mine. "Tell me," he whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and something else, something that sent a shiver of anticipation through me. "Tell me what you mean, Grandma Eleanor. Please." My smile widened, a slow, predatory curve. "Patience, darling boy," I repeated, my voice now laced with a hint of something darker, something more intimate. "All in good time. But perhaps actions speak louder than words, don't you think?" I lowered my head slowly, deliberately, my gaze never leaving his eyes, watching as understanding and a flicker of dawning desire ignited within their depths. The fire crackled behind us, casting flickering shadows across the room, and the sea murmured its ancient secrets against the shore. The game, I knew, was reaching its most delicious stage. And Daniel, my dear, sweet, unsuspecting Daniel, was about to learn just how deep and how binding those family secrets truly were. The night, I sensed, was going to be very, very interesting indeed. The air crackled between us, thick with unspoken desires and the weight of centuries. My breath hitched in my throat, a carefully feigned tremor of anticipation mirroring the genuine tremor I felt rippling through Daniel's body beneath my touch. His eyes, wide and dark, searched mine, a silent plea, a question trembling on the edge of his lips. "Patience is a virtue, darling Daniel," I murmured, my voice a silken caress, yet my words themselves were a subtle provocation. I traced the line of his jaw again, my fingertips lingering on the sensitive skin beneath his earlobe. He shuddered, a barely perceptible movement, but enough to send a thrill of predatory satisfaction coursing through me. "But some virtues," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, "are meant to be tested. Aren't they?" I lowered my gaze, my eyes flickering down to his lips, tracing their youthful fullness, the slight tremor in his lower lip betraying his inner turmoil. He was young, so very young and deliciously, devastatingly vulnerable. And the forbidden fruit, as always, tasted the sweetest slowly, deliberately. I leaned in, closing the final, infinitesimal gap between us. My lips brushed against his, a feather-light touch, a mere whisper of a kiss, yet potent with unspoken promise. He gasped softly, a small intake of breath that vibrated against my own lips, and then, with a hesitant urgency, his mouth opened beneath mine. The kiss was tentative at first, almost shy, the clumsy exploration of youth unsure of itself, yet brimming with an untamed hunger. I let him lead for a moment, savoring the raw, nascent passion, the intoxicating blend of innocence and burgeoning desire. Then, subtly, imperceptibly, I took control, and my fingers tightened on his jaw, tilting his face up to mine, deepening the kiss, drawing him further into the intoxicating vortex I was creating. My lips parted, inviting him in, my tongue tracing the seam of his mouth, a silent invitation to a world of sensation he had only just begun to imagine. He responded instantly, his hesitation melting away, replaced by a fervent urgency that mirrored my own carefully cultivated desire. His hands, which had been hovering awkwardly at his sides, now reached up, grasping my waist, pulling me closer, molding my body against his. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room, the rhythmic murmur of the sea providing a hushed, sensual soundtrack to our increasingly intimate embrace. Time seemed to dissolve, the world outside the cottage fading away, leaving only the heat of our bodies, the taste of his lips, the intoxicating scent of his youthful skin mingled with my own carefully crafted perfume. We broke apart finally, breathless, our chests heaving in unison, our eyes locked in a charged, silent exchange. His cheeks were flushed, his lips slightly swollen, his eyes wide and dazed, reflecting a mixture of confusion, exhilaration, and a dawning, intoxicating understanding. He was lost. Utterly, completely lost. And I had only just begun. "Grandma Eleanor," he breathed, the words a husky whisper. The grandma, now barely a vestige of formality, a ghost of the innocent relationship he thought we had. I smiled, a slow, predatory curve of my lips, tracing the line of his jaw again, my thumb brushing against his still tingling lips. "Just Eleanor, darling," I corrected softly, my voice laced with a newfound intimacy, a shared secret now binding us together. "Just Eleanor for you." He swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving mine. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air between us, the unspoken desire shimmering in the depths of his gaze. He wanted to understand. He craved explanation. He was teetering on the precipice of a terrifying, exhilarating truth, and I, of course, was more than ready to oblige. The time for veiled hints and cryptic pronouncements was drawing to a close. It was time to begin weaving the narrative, to spin the tale of our timeless connection, to solidify my hold on his heart, his mind, his very soul. That I drew back slightly, creating a small, tantalizing distance between us, and led him back to the sofa, drawing him down beside me. The firelight danced in my eyes as I turned to face him, my expression now a carefully crafted blend of mystery, allure, and a hint of ancient sorrow. "You asked me about family secrets, Daniel," I began, my voice dropping to a low, confiding tone, the perfect storyteller preparing to weave a captivating spell. "And about echoes through time. And eternal connections. Are you ready to hear the truth, darling boy? The real truth about our family? About us?" He nodded slowly, his eyes wide and fixed on mine, his breath held captive in his chest. He was poised, breathless, on the edge of revelation, completely unaware of the treacherous depths that lay beneath the surface of my carefully constructed narrative. And I, Eleanor, the weaver of tales, the mistress of manipulation, was ready to plunge him and myself into the heart of the darkness. The story, I knew, was about to become truly enthralling. And the night was still young. "Yes," Daniel breathed, his voice barely audible, a plea and a surrender all in one. "Tell me." My smile deepened, a slow, triumphant curve. This was it. The culmination of weeks of careful planning, of subtle manipulation, of drawing him, thread by thread, into my web. He was ready. Ripe for the picking. I took his hands in mine, my fingers intertwining with his, feeling the youthful warmth of his skin against my own cool, ageless touch. I looked into his eyes, holding his gaze, imbuing my own with an ancient intensity, a manufactured sorrow, a captivating mystery. I began, my voice dropping to a hushed, theatrical whisper. "Long ago, darling Daniel. Centuries ago, in fact. Our story, it's not measured in years, but in lifetimes." His brow furrowed, confusion clouding his desire, but the fascination remained, holding him captive. Centuries? What are you saying? Imagine, I continued, ignoring his question, weaving my tale, drawing him deeper into the illusion. Imagine a bond so profound, so utterly unbreakable, that it defies even death itself. A love that echoes through the ages, seeking each other out, again and again, in every lifetime. I paused, letting my words resonate, allowing the fantastical notion to take root in his receptive mind. That, darling Daniel, is our story. The story of you and I. He blinked, his confusion deepening, yet a flicker of something else, something akin to understanding, or perhaps simply a desperate wish to understand, began to dawn in his eyes. But how? Grandma Eleanor, you can't mean… Oh, but I do. Darling, I interrupted softly, my smile softening into a gentle, almost melancholic expression, the picture of ancient, enduring love. You see, time for us is fluid. Linearity is an illusion, a construct for those who cannot perceive the deeper currents. But we, Daniel, we are different. We are attuned to those currents. We can feel the echoes. I tightened my grip on his hands, my gaze intensifying. Don't you feel it, Daniel? This pull? This undeniable connection between us? It's not just chance, darling boy. It's destiny. It's recognition. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, desperately trying to decipher the truth, or perhaps simply surrendering to the seductive allure of my carefully crafted fantasy. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he whispered, I do feel something. Something strong. But is doubt. Darling Daniel, I said softly, cutting him off, anticipating his questions, controlling the narrative. Doubt is the enemy of true understanding. You must learn to trust your feelings, your instincts, to embrace the echoes. I leaned closer again, my voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper, my breath warm against his cheek. In each lifetime, we find each other again, Daniel. In different forms, different guises, but the connection remains, burning bright, undeniable. Sometimes we are family. Sometimes something more. The unspoken implication hung heavy between us, the forbidden nature of our embrace now explicitly acknowledged, yet cloaked in the mystical guise of eternal connection. He was trembling again, but this time it was not just nervousness. It was something else, something darker, something undeniably aroused. And what are we now? He whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and longing. I smiled, a slow, knowing curve of my lips. Now, darling Daniel, I murmured, tracing the shell of his ear with my fingertip, sending shivers through his body. Now we are whatever we choose to be. The echoes are calling, Daniel.
Can you hear them?
They are telling us to embrace our destiny. I stood up, drawing him up with me, my hand still clasped in his. I led him towards the window, where the moonlight streamed in, bathing us in an ethereal glow. The sea murmured its timeless secrets against the shore. The fire crackled behind us, casting dancing shadows across the room. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, bathed in moonlight, bound by a lie and a desire that felt both ancient and terrifyingly new. Look at the sea, Daniel, I whispered, my voice hypnotic, drawing him into my spell. It's been there for millennia, witnessing countless lives, countless loves, countless echoes. And it will be there long after we are gone. But our connection, darling boy, our connection is just as eternal, just as timeless. He gazed out at the moonlit sea, his face pale, his eyes wide and lost. He was teetering on the edge, ready to fall, ready to surrender to the fantasy I had so carefully constructed. And I, Eleanor, the weaver of tales, the mistress of manipulation, was ready to catch him. Come, darling, I murmured, turning him back towards me, my eyes locking with his. Let me show you what eternity feels like. And as I led him towards the dimly lit bedroom, the firelight casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, I knew that Daniel, my sweet, unsuspecting Daniel had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back now. The echoes of eternity had claimed him, and the game for Eleanor was won. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.